Welcome to the introductory session of the online tutorial for the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, also referred to as CORSIA. This introductory presentation is divided into 4 sections. The first section will provide an outline of materials contained in this online tutorial. The second section will provide an overview of the 39th ICAO Assembly, including the agreement on CORSIA. Next, a high-level summary of the ICAO States Action Plans initiative will be given. And finally, an overview of CORSIA will be provided. Let's get started with an outline of the materials that are provided through this online tutorial on CORSIA. The online tutorial on CORSIA is split into 5 sessions. The introduction, where you are right now, is intended to provide a background on the agreement of CORSIA through the 39th Assembly, identify synergies between states' action plans and CORSIA, and provide a high-level overview of CORSIA. The second session will provide a more in-depth description on the participation and emissions coverage within CORSIA. The third session will build off of the second and provide a more in-depth description on calculation and distribution of offsetting requirements. The fourth session will describe the various components of a Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification, or MRV, system. And finally, the last session outlining and describing emissions units and registries. Starting from the second session, not only is there a presentation component explaining the topics, but you can also go through some illustrative exercises which are relevant to the specific topic in each session. The exercise component of this session is designed to deepen the understanding of CORSIA. It is suggested that after listening to the presentation in each session, you work through the illustrative exercise by yourself and then listen to the exercise presentation under each session to check your answers to the exercises. Now let's jump right in and go through some of the outcomes of the 39th Assembly. The 39th session of the ICAO Assembly, held from September 27th to October 6th, 2016 in Montreal, Canada, made a series of important decisions as a result of several years of intensive work in the environmental field in ICAO. The Assembly adopted 3 resolutions focused on the environment. A39-1 on general provisions, noise, and local air quality, A39-2 on climate change, and A39-3 on a global market-based measure scheme. Resolution A39-1 focuses on the technical work program on noise and local air quality undertaken with the support of the ICAO's Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection, or CAPE. Resolution A39-2 provides the organization's work program on international aviation and climate change, including the areas on global aspirational goals, states' action plans and assistance to states, and sustainable alternative fuels for aviation. The Assembly, by adopting Resolution A39-3, reached a historic agreement to implement a global market-based measure scheme. This scheme is known as CORSIA, which stands for the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. This graph provides a visual on how all the elements of the basket of measures are anticipated to contribute to meet the aspirational goal of carbon neutral growth from 2020 for international aviation CO2 emission. It is important to highlight that the role of CORSIA is to complement a broader package of other measures and address any remaining emission gaps to achieve this goal. This point is clearly mentioned in paragraphs 2 through 4 of Assembly Resolution A39-3. Before we see the overview of CORSIA, which is one of the components of the basket of measures, let's briefly talk about state action plans, which provide an important platform for states to communicate the planned actions to ICAO on a basket of measures selected by the states. We will now go through ICAO States Action Plans Initiative and identify synergies between states' action plans and CORSIA. For states, the action plan is a way to voluntarily identify, document, communicate, and implement measures to reduce emissions from international aviation. For ICAO, The data included in the action plans are also used to track the progress towards the collective global aspirational goals, which are improving fuel efficiency by 2% per year and, from 2020, keeping net CO2 emissions at the same levels, or carbon neutral growth from 2020. One of the important success factors for development and implementation of state action plans is the cooperation and coordination between all stakeholders, such as governments and aviation industry, through the establishment of a national stakeholder group. The National Stakeholder Group provides an opportunity to bring multiple stakeholders around the table, opens and maintains the communication channels, and facilitates decision-making and data collection while avoiding possible duplication of work. Without cooperation and coordination among stakeholders, led by national focal points, it would be very difficult to develop feasible and practical action plans supported by robust data. Such stakeholder cooperation will also provide a critical foundation for the successful implementation of CORSIA. Here is the type of information that should be included in state action plans. The first step is to designate a national focal point who coordinates with stakeholders and leads the development of the state action plan. Focal points also liaise with ICAO and get specific access to dedicated ICAO seminars and supporting tools. The appointment of a focal point is an important decision by the state. Step 2. Based on the information provided by stakeholders, a baseline for fuel consumption and CO2 emissions is calculated based on a scenario that no action is taken to reduce emissions. In other words, the do-nothing scenario. Step 3. Mitigation measures are selected from the basket of measures based on consultation among stakeholders and taking into account the circumstances of the states. Step 4. Expected results in the terms of CO2 emissions reduction by the selected measures would be quantified and compared against the baseline, or do-nothing, scenario. As a result, the action plan will show the expected trends of CO2 emissions from international aviation as the result of the implementation of the various mitigation measures selected in the action plan. Last but not least, Step 5. States' action plans also enable states to identify assistance needs. In some cases, stakeholders would identify a series of mitigation measures but would not have the financial, human, or technical resources to implement them. A state's action plan is the document where states should identify these assistance needs. Hopefully, from this slide, you have a better understanding that the added value of the state's action plan initiative lies with the collaboration process leading to the development of the action plan. The numbers speak for themselves. To date, the initiative has been a success, with 103 states having voluntarily submitted an action plan. Those states represent more than 90% of international traffic. More than 1,150 experts from 132 states have been trained. There are also 8 states involved in the 4 buddy partnerships. And finally, we have 2 joint assistance projects which have created real benefits for the states involved. ICAO Doc 9988 is the main reference document which includes information on the following steps for the development and implementation of state action plans: overview and introduction, baseline calculation, mitigation measures and expected results, implementation and assistance, and an appendix with examples and detailed information. ICAO has also developed a suite of tools to facilitate the estimation of past and future fuel consumption, as well as to help quantify the fuel savings from the implementation of measures selected in the action plans. There are many synergies between states' action plans and CORSIA. For example, state action plans provide a big picture view of environmental protection, where progress in all elements of a basket of mitigation measures should be reflected in state action plans, which is based on direction from Resolution A39-3, paragraphs 6 and 7. State action plans containing a robust data collection, monitoring, and reporting mechanism provide a good basis for which the CORSIA MRV can be derived. State action plans can reflect the results of CO2 emissions offsetting under CORSIA by participating states. And of course, it is very important to have compatible tools for use under CORSIA and state action plans, making for a more effective implementation of both. Now that we've identified some of the important synergies between state action plans and CORSIA, let's transition into a high-level discussion on CORSIA. CORSIA is the first global market-based measure scheme for any industry sector. As was noted previously, CORSIA is one element in the basket of measures to achieve ICAO's global aspirational goal of carbon neutral growth from 2020. In fact, as referenced in paragraph 2 of the Resolution A39-3, the preference is for the use of non-market-based measures to reduce aviation emissions, such as through aircraft technology, operational improvements, and sustainable alternative fuels. Finally, CORSIA is one of the measures to be included in states' action plans, while all elements in the basket should be progressed. Now, a brief video will play providing an introduction on CORSIA, which can also be found on ICAO's environmental website.
Commercial aviation connects billions of travellers and moves millions of tonnes of cargo every year, providing the global economy with nearly 63 million jobs and contributing $2.7 trillion to the global gross domestic product. It does this in a safe and secure way while reducing its environmental impact. ICAO has achieved unprecedented progress on a variety of measures that contribute to environmental protection and also to the attainment of UN Sustainable Development Goals. Since the 1960s, aircraft have become 80% more energy efficient and 75% quieter. Aviation, domestic and international, as a whole accounts for about 2% of global emissions, with international aviation accounting for about 1.3%. Working under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, governments can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all domestic sources, such as power generation, agriculture and road transport, including emissions from domestic aviation. Reducing emissions from international aviation is the responsibility of ICAO and its member states. In 2010, ICAO adopted two sectoral aspirational goals: 2% annual fuel efficiency improvement and carbon neutral growth from 2020 onwards. It also adopted a basket of measures. However, technological and operational improvements alone are not enough to meet the carbon neutral growth goal. Alternative sustainable fuels require further development and maturity to make a significant contribution to reducing CO2 emissions. To fill the emissions gap, the 39th ICAO Assembly agreed on a global market-based measure to help achieve the carbon neutral growth. The agreed scheme is referred to as CORSIA, which stands for Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. Offsetting is the process through which a company or organisation compensates for its carbon emissions by buying credits from the carbon market. These credits are generated by projects that reduce carbon emissions in different parts of the world. For example, by planting trees that absorb carbon or replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources such as wind and solar. Taking into account the different circumstances of different countries, CORSIA was designed to incorporate a phased-in implementation. States' participation in the pilot and first phase from 2021 to 2026 is voluntary. As of October 2016, 66 states that represent 86.5% of global international aviation activities announced their voluntary participation in the CORSIA from its outset. For the second phase from 2027, all states with an individual share of international aviation activities above 0.5% of the total, or whose cumulative share reaches 90% of the total, are required to participate. Least developed countries, small island developing states and landlocked developing countries are exempted from participation unless they volunteer to decide to do so. CORSIA is based on a route-based approach. This means that only emissions from international flights between two states, where both the origin and destination states are included in CORSIA, are part of the scheme. Once we know the participation of states and the coverage of air routes between participating states under CORSIA, we calculate the offsetting requirements for individual aircraft operators every year. Each operator monitors its annual fuel consumption from all its flights on the routes covered by CORSIA and estimates its annual CO2 emissions. Each operator reports this data to the national authority of the state. ICAO collects all CO2 emissions data and estimates a sectoral growth factor of emissions. Using the sectoral growth factor of emissions every year, each operator calculates the amount of CO2 offsetting requirements by multiplying its emissions with the sectoral growth factor. The operator then purchases a number of emissions units equivalent to this requirement from the carbon market. Each emissions unit corresponds to 1 tonne of CO2 that was reduced by another project or programme. To ensure that operators, states and ICAO are able to implement the scheme starting in 2021, ICAO is currently developing rules and procedures for a monitoring, reporting and verification system, criteria for emissions units to be purchased by aircraft operators, and registries. These rules and procedures will safeguard the environmental integrity of the scheme by ensuring that the offsets are of high quality and come from reliable sources. ICAO, in partnership with governments and international organisations, will assist all states to put in place the necessary infrastructure to ensure that they are ready to implement CORSIA. Starting in 2022, the scheme will be reviewed every 3 years. Climate change is a global problem which requires global solutions. The CORSIA is a global scheme for the international aviation industry. ICAO is doing what it knows to do best: connect the world by bringing people closer together while reducing its environmental impact and contributing to the sustainable future of our planet.
So what must be done to implement CORSIA? Paragraph 20 of Assembly Resolution A39-3 requests the development of ICAO standards and recommended practices, or SARPs, and guidance for the following components: monitoring, reporting and verification system, also referred to as the MRV system, emissions unit criteria, or EUC, and registry architecture for CORSIA. The development of internationally harmonized rules through ICAO SARPs and guidance for these components are one of the primary building blocks to implement CORSIA. The other primary component is capacity building and assistance for member states. Paragraph 22 of Assembly Resolution A39-3 instructs ICAO and member states to take all necessary actions in providing the capacity building and assistance and building partnerships for implementation of the CORSIA. Some capacity building has already started, such as seminars and training. Other activities, such as the support for the development of national regulatory framework and the establishment of necessary infrastructure, will also commence. This timeline provides an overview of the process for the development of CORSIA-related ICAO SARPs and guidance. Work is still ongoing, and the initial drafting of CORSIA SARPs and guidance is expected to be finalized at the CAPE GMTF meeting in June 2017. This is Step 3, and after which the draft will go for CAPE Steering Group's review and approval in September, Step 4. Following CAPE's approval, the draft CORSIA SARPs will proceed in the review process by the Council and other ICAO bodies. Step 5. This stage will include full consultation with the 191 ICAO member states in Step 6. In line with the Assembly resolution, the Council is then anticipated to adopt CORSIA SARPs in mid-2018, Step 9, followed by further consultation with the member states, including the filing of differences process to the SARPs, Step 12. This will lead to January 1st, 2019, when the CORSIA SARP should become applicable. In addition to SARPs development and approval, you might note that further CORSIA seminars are planned in early 2018 to provide additional information on CORSIA implementation. This timeline provides more detail around the timing and interaction for capacity building and assistance. We have now completed the introductory presentation of the online CORSIA tutorial. In summary, you've heard about the environmental outcomes of the 39th ICAO Assembly, ICAO's State Action Plans Initiative and how it links with CORSIA, and received a high-level overview on CORSIA. Thank you for participating in the introductory session of the online CORSIA tutorial. After completing this presentation, you are encouraged to watch the next session in the online CORSIA tutorial series, an explanation on Resolution A39-3, which provides a more in-depth description on the participation and emissions coverage in CORSIA. More information can also be found on the ICAO's environmental website at www.icao.int/ENV.